You know that feeling, right? That pressure cooker in your head before a big deadline, or when you're just stuck in traffic and going nowhere. We all just call it stress. But what is actually going on inside our brains when we feel that way? Well, today, we're going to pop the hood and take a look.
And what if I told you that all that stress could literally, physically, shrink parts of your brain? I know, sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie, but that's the big question we're diving into. We're going to look at some pretty solid evidence that shows how chronic stress isn't just a mood, it's a physical force that can actually reshape the architecture of your mind.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the body's built-in alarm system. Then, we'll dive into a kind of hidden chemical battle happening in your brain. After that, we'll check out the hard evidence from the lab, see what the physical consequences really look like. And finally, we'll connect all the dots to understand why this is so important for your everyday life and your long-term health.
All right, so to really get what's going on, we have to start with the basics. And the basic truth is, stress is a survival mechanism. It is wired deep, deep into our biology for very good reason.
This whole response is actually brilliant. If you need to run away from a predator. Your heart starts pounding, your muscles get a sudden jolt of energy, your body is basically getting ready for some serious action. But here's the catch. That system was designed for short, intense bursts. The real problem starts when it gets stuck in the on position. And the main culprit behind that? Well, it's a hormone you've probably heard of. Cortisol. Think of it as your body's emergency alarm. When there's a threat, it starts blaring, telling your body to get all its resources ready right now. But what happens when that alarm just never, ever shuts off? Well, that's when things get complicated, and it's also when a quiet hero enters the story to try and balance things out.
You see, inside your brain, there's this constant balancing act going on. And when it comes to stress, it really boils down to a showdown between two critical chemicals that have totally opposite jobs.
So on one side, you've got cortisol, the alarm. And on the other, you have this thing called BDNF, which stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Just think of BDNF as like Miracle-Gro for your brain cells. It's the protector. It helps your neurons grow, make new connections, and just generally stay healthy. And here's the kicker. These two do not play nicely together.
For the longest time, scientists kind of had this hunch about the link between cortisol and BDNF. But it wasn't until a 2010 study from a bust university that we got some of the most powerful, direct evidence that really blew the lid off this hidden relationship. The study found a significant negative correlation. Okay, in normal English, that just means they work like a seesaw. When one of them goes up, the other one has to go down. And when you actually look at the data they collected, this pattern is just impossible to ignore. So, first up, the researchers looked at brain tissue from people who had schizophrenia, which is a condition often linked with really high levels of stress. And in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that handles decision-making, they found exactly what they were looking for. Cortisol levels, way up. And levels of the brain's protector, BDNF, you guessed it, way, way down. A perfect seesaw. And just to be sure this wasn't some kind of fluke, they ran a similar test, this time on rats that were exposed to stress. And guess what? They found the exact same pattern. The stressed-out rats had much higher cortisol, and you guessed it, much lower levels of that protective BDNF. So the takeaway here is crystal clear. This isn't just a theory anymore. The data shows us what's happening. Chronic stress cranks up the cortisol alarm, and that constant alarm suppresses the very chemical your brain needs to repair itself. It's like when the fire alarm is constantly blaring, the construction crew can't get any work done. Okay, so we've got a chemical imbalance. Big deal, right? Well, what does that actually do to your brain physically? Now we're going to look at the actual evidence, and this is where you can literally see the damage.
And this is where it gets really real. We're not just talking about being in a bad mood or feeling anxious. We are talking about tangible, structural changes to your neurons, the very cells that make up your thoughts, your memories, your entire sense of self.
Believe it or not, we've actually had visual proof of this for decades. A landmark study way back in 1990 was one of the first to actually see the damage with their own eyes. They exposed rats to high levels of the rat version of cortisol for about 3 weeks, and then they put their brain cells under a microscope. And the numbers they found, wow, they're just staggering. The researchers literally counted the communication branches on brain cells in the hippocampus. That's a huge area for memory. Healthy rats, they averaged about 12.5 branches per cell. But the high cortisol rats, just 7.3. That is a massive 41% decrease in the brain's entire communication network. And this explains so much.
Think about a healthy brain cell like a big, lush tree with branches reaching out everywhere to communicate. Well, chronic stress is like a long-term drought. It makes those branches, they're called dendrites, wither up and pull back. So next time you feel that brain fog when you're stressed out, or you can't quite find the word you're looking for, you're literally feeling the effects of this physical breakdown.
Oh, and it gets worse. It's not just that stress is damaging the cells you already have. Newer research shows that it actually grinds the brain's factory to a halt. Chronic stress stops neurogenesis, which is the birth of new brain cells. So not only are you losing branches on your old trees, you've stopped planting any new ones.
Okay, so we've looked at lab data, we've seen damaged cells, but what does all of this have to do with you in your day-to-day life? Let's connect these dots from the science right back to our own heads.
You know, it's so easy to hear this and think, oh, well, that's only for people in extreme situations or, lab rats. But that's not true. This cortisol BDNF seesaw is a fundamental part of our biology. It is happening inside all of us all the time, and its effects can show up in ways that we all recognize. Have you ever felt like your brain is just full when you're really stressed, or you have a name that's right there on the tip of your tongue, but you just can't grab it? That isn't just you being tired. Those are the direct symptoms of the physical damage we've been talking about. Having trouble remembering things, difficulty focusing, these are the real-world consequences of a brain that's under siege by cortisol.
And if we zoom out even further, this exact same mechanism is a huge factor in some of the most serious mental health conditions we know of. The shrunken hippocampus that doctors see in patients with chronic PTSD or major depression, that's a direct result of this kind of long-term damage. It's also why being chronically stressed in your 40s and 50s is now seen as a major risk factor for developing dementia later in life.
So if you take just one thing away from all of this science, please let it be this. The old idea of telling someone to just get over their stress or that it's all in their head, it completely misses the point. Stress is a real, physiological process with measurable physical consequences.
But here's the final thought, and it's actually an empowering one. Our brains are incredibly plastic. They are designed to change. And if a negative force like stress can damage them, well, it stands to reason that positive forces and good habits can help them heal, repair, and maybe even grow stronger. And that, of course, leaves us with the most important question of all.